They say that you shouldn't buy a flat as an investment property. So I bought a flat. So I thought this was the perfect opportunity to cover the debate, which is, should you buy a house or should you buy flats? So here is the flat that I bought, and I'll be releasing a video on this one very soon. But for this video, I want to talk to you a bit about why people might not look to invest in flats. So the first reason why is lack of control. As you can imagine, this building has lots of flats and there has to be a managing agent that sits above to manage the block, manage any maintenance that comes up, and take payments off of all of the different flats. Now, there is a lack of control because I have to pay them every month or every year, regardless of whether I want to or not. It's part of the contract, it's part of the lease and owning a flat in this building. So I don't have any control over the works that they put that money towards. I don't have any control over the builders they get out to quote, who they select to go with. I just have to pay that money in my installments, regardless of whether I have a choice or not. So next up is tenant churn. As you can imagine with a flat, you tend to encourage perhaps a younger demographic, or perhaps you attract someone who's more likely to move on quickly. They might only stay for 6 months, for 12 months, maybe 2 years, but rarely are they in a property for 3, 4, 5 years, although some are, it happens rarely. So you've got a higher rate of tenant churn. Whereas perhaps if you bought a house, you might get a family that lived there, they might buy stuff to live there for longer, and you might have less tenant changeover, you might have less voids, and therefore potentially also less maintenance. Number 3 is that flats are harder to add value. Although doing a conversion in a flat, like a 1 to a 2 bedroom conversion, or maybe a 2 to a 3 bedroom flat conversion, is still very common. You know, it's done in houses and it is done in flats quite regularly. If I actually wanted to add physical square meterage and add physical space to a property, it's much harder in a flat because I can't just go and add an extension onto the back. At very most, what I can do is if I purchase a top floor flat, if I manage to get approval to actually go up into the loft, I might be able to do that. But even then, it's a much harder thing to endure because you have to contact the freeholder, you have to get it signed off because you're a leaseholder of a flat, and then you have to go down the route of planning permission. So adding value is much harder, and therefore people look at flats as potentially a worse investment than perhaps a property is because they can't go up in value as quickly. So if I haven't put you off of flats so far, then this next part of the video, I'm going to talk to you about the positives about buying a flat. So the first positive is actually in contradiction about the maintenance charge, because I've told you that there's potentially a heavy maintenance charge. It might be monthly, might be yearly, and some people really don't like that because you have lack of control. But the positive to that is that you've always got someone there who can potentially help you remedy the maintenance of the building, whether that's the guttering, whether it's the roof, whether it's the communal hallways, the windows, the doors. There is normally a managing agent who is in charge of helping you put that stuff right. And if you're constantly contributing to a managing agent and they have a sinking fund, then there's potentially a fund of money ready to go and be deployed on any of those items. Whereas with a house, you might not have those regular maintenance payments, and therefore you might save a lot of money in the short term, but then you might suddenly, at certain points in your investment journey, get stung by bigger costs, such as a roof going, such as damp works, such as needing a new kitchen, a new bathroom. And sometimes those costs can be quite large, yet quite unexpected. And unless you put money aside for those each month, can be a bit of a shock. And the second positive is the fact that flats cost less. So there is a lower barrier to entry. It goes without saying that if I want to buy a property and it's a house, it's probably going to come with a higher price tag. For example, the flat I just showed you, or will be showing you very soon, I bought that for around 150,000. Whereas if I wanted to buy a 1 or 2 bedroom house in this area, I might be looking at more like 250,000, possibly even 300,000. So at this moment in time, you might be thinking, what are the main differences between a freehold and leasehold title? What are the different ways that we can own it? So I thought at this point, I will turn to the trusty whiteboard. Now, if we start by drawing a lovely picture of a house. Now, a house can be owned in 2 ways. Most typically, it's freehold, but also sometimes you do find leasehold houses too, more commonly in perhaps the northern parts of the UK or in older properties in the UK. But when we have a freehold property, we basically own the whole of the property as well as the land that it sits on. We have a boundary that we are purchasing, and we're purchasing the whole thing. We own that completely outright. Now, when it comes to leasehold properties, these are slightly different because we are buying the house and we have a lease over the land that it sits on. Most typically, let's say, 900 years plus in the UK, because at some point, some sort of lord of the manor would have sold off a bit of land and he'd have put a lease on there, and hence why this is a leasehold house. But most commonly, they might have a long lease left, so maybe 800 years, 900 years, and so on. And you'd end up paying usually, let's say like £4 to £12 per annum in ground rent, a kind of peppercorn rent, and rarely do they even collect it. But that is most typically how we'd own a house. So I've drawn now a lovely picture of a block of flats. Now with a block of flats, there are typically two forms of ownership. There is share of freehold, because you're never going to own the whole freehold to the building. You're never going to own everything, because then you'd own someone else's flat within that building. You could potentially own a share of that freehold. Or the other option is a leasehold. Now, with the share of freehold, what you're typically going to do is find that everyone has a share in the building. They own the freehold to their flat, and maybe this person owns 20%, this person's 20%, 20%, so on and so forth. You get the picture. Everyone has a share of the building, they have an invested interest, and they own a portion of the building. Now, the benefit to share of freehold is the fact that you then have more control over the building. Typically, the owners collectively go in together, they have annual meetings, and they select the maintenance company that they want to work with. So collectively, if we're going to select a managing agent, that's great. It's the best scenario, because then we can decide how much we want to pay and exactly what they're going to manage on our behalf. The other benefit to share of freehold is that you are in control of your lease. So when your lease starts to go down, well, the main person who gets to extend it, well, it's you, because you own the share of your freehold. And now all you have to do is go through the paperwork side of things with your solicitor in order to extend your lease back up. If you're not share of freehold and you are leasehold, this isn't as favourable, but this is still very, very common in the UK. And a leasehold is where you own the lease to your part of your flat, and you have a lease over that, but effectively you have a freeholder over and above you. So you might have a leasehold of 99 years, and if you let that go all the way down to 0, then you have to give it back to your freeholder. Whereas what you want to do when it gets down to, let's say, 80 years, is you want to extend it back up. You want to pay to extend your lease so that you go back up, and you might want to extend that to 125, or in an ideal world, you want 999 years on your lease. That is the best case scenario for a leasehold property. But overall, you have less say over who is in control of your flat, because the freeholder is the person making the decision. The freeholder is the person deciding who is the managing agent, and then of course the managing agent then says what they're going to charge you. Now, there's one thing I haven't talked about at all in this video, and that is new build flats. And that is one of the most common questions I get asked, is should I buy a new build flat? Now, from my perspective, I think they're a completely different ballgame altogether, and they have more potential negatives than they do positives. But hear me out. The main negatives for me are often you have to buy them off plan, which means you can't actually get ownership of that property and start renting it out for, let's say, 6 months, 12 months, or sometimes even 24 months. There is an opportunity cost when you put down the deposit to purchase that flat. So that's one thing. The second thing is the high maintenance charges. Quite often these newer blocks are really nice, they're really fancy, they're luxury, but they do come with that higher premium service charge, which can really eat away at your profit margin. And finally, you're buying a new build. New builds come with a premium price tag. So for you to make money on that property, for it to go up in value, it's going to take longer. You're going to have to own that property for longer to see the benefit. Now, in contrast to that, I do think that buying a new build flat would be great from the benefit of having, hopefully, very, very limited amounts of maintenance in the first 5 or 10 years of its life. Not only that, but of course there's a great opportunity with many of these new build flats to be able to do serviced accommodation. So holiday let them out, make more money from them. So I'm not saying they're a bad opportunity all round. I'm just saying I do prefer second-hand flats where I can try and get a bigger discount. That's more what I like to do when I'm investing. So to conclude this video, the main thing that I focus on is the deal itself. I don't mind whether a property is a flat or a house. I don't mind whether it's in the north or the south. I don't mind whether it's 2 beds or 3 beds. I focus on the specific deal. I think about, what is this opportunity? How much can I get the property for? How much money can I make? So when I'm looking at a flat, for example, if I look at it and I go, right, with all of these costs included, like maintenance charge, like the ground rent, is this still a good opportunity? Am I going to make money over the next 10 or 20 years? Does it cash flow well in the short term? Great, I'll go ahead. Whereas if I looked at a house and I thought the opposite, I thought this isn't a great area, or this doesn't have much capital growth potential, or it doesn't cash flow well, I'm not going to buy the house. And I apply the same metrics to flats or houses, and I look at the individual opportunity in front of me. Now, I hope this has been a useful video. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you next week.